Have you ever had that feeling? Walking home late at night, that you weren't truly alone? That prickling on the back of your neck? The sudden urge to look over your shoulder? For Liam, an exchange student in a sleepy suburban town, that feeling became a terrifying reality. This is the story of his walk home, a walk that would change how he saw the darkness forever. Liam was used to late nights. As an exchange student, his study sessions often stretched well past midnight. His dorm was just a short walk away, a route he'd taken dozens of times without a second thought. But this night was different. It was just after 1 a.m. There was no moon, and a thick, clammy fog had crept in, swallowing the familiar streets and muffling the world in an unnatural silence. His path led him right past a small, isolated rise, known to the locals as the Hill of Sighs. The name alone was enough to give you pause. Rumor had it that a tragic accident had happened there decades ago, leaving a permanent stain on the quiet landscape. Most people avoided it after dark, but for Liam, it was just part of his usual route. Tonight, however, the hill seemed different. It loomed out of the fog, a dark, silent sentinel. As he drew near the base of the hill, a sound cut through the thick air. It was faint at first, a soft, ethereal melody, a woman's voice singing a wordless, haunting lullaby. The sound seemed to drift down from the very peak of the hill, winding its way through the fog directly to him. Liam tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just someone listening to music on their porch, the sound carrying strangely in the damp air. But the melody was too clear, too raw. It wasn't coming from speakers. It felt alive. He tried to ignore it, picking up his pace, his worn sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. But the closer he got to the hill, the louder the singing became. It was hypnotic, pulling at him, yet utterly terrifying. Then, another sound joined the melody, a faint, wet, swooshing noise. It sounded like heavy, damp fabric being dragged through tall, dew-soaked grass. Swish, 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 keeping a slow, deliberate rhythm with his quickening footsteps. Liam's heart began to hammer against his ribs. The logical part of his brain was screaming, but the primal fear was taking over. He told himself it was just the wind, his overactive imagination fueled by local ghost stories. He fixed his eyes on the next street lamp, a small beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness, and walked faster. His casual stroll had turned into a power walk, bordering on a jog. Then, just as he passed the midpoint of the hill, the singing stopped. Abruptly, the silence that fell was somehow more terrifying than the song had been. It was heavy, expectant. The swishing sound was gone, too. All Liam could hear was the frantic beat of his own heart and his ragged, panicked breaths puffing out in white clouds in front of him. And then he felt it, an undeniable, bone-chilling certainty that he was being watched. Not from the hill anymore. It was close. Directly behind him. The kind of feeling that makes every hair on your body stand on end. Every instinct screamed at him not to turn around, to just run. Keep running, and don't look back. But the curiosity, the morbid need to know, was too strong. He couldn't fight it. He slowed to a halt, his feet feeling like they were cemented to the sidewalk. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. 3. Taking a shaky breath, he finally forced himself to turn his head and look back down the empty road he had just walked. At first, he saw nothing, just the lonely street disappearing into the thick fog. But then, his eyes caught a flicker of movement under the weak, buzzing glow of the last street lamp he'd passed. It wasn't a person. Lying right in the middle of the sidewalk, precisely where his feet had been just moments before, was a single, white silk handkerchief. It was stained with mud and dampness, looking ancient and discarded. His mind reeled. Where had that come from? It definitely wasn't there a second ago. He would have seen it, stepped on Italiana. As he instinctively stared down at this impossible object, a voice whispered directly into his ear. It was cold, breathless, and impossibly close. Don't rush. Sing with me. A guttural shriek tore from Liam's throat. He didn't even remember making the sound. He stumbled backward, His legs finally obeying the command to run, he sprinted, his lungs burning, his mind a white-hot explosion of pure terror. He didn't dare look back. The image of the muddy handkerchief, the feel of that cold breath on his skin, the chilling invitation it was all he could think about. The glowing entrance to his dormitory building appeared through the fog like a gate to another world. He practically threw himself at the door, fumbling with his keys, his hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries to get the lock open. He scrambled inside, slamming the heavy door shut behind him and leaning against it, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. He was safe. He was inside. He was in the light. After a few moments, his breathing began to steady. He needed to know. To look. Creeping over to the glass panel on the door, he peered back out towards the street, towards the hill of sighs. The fog was even thicker now, a solid wall of gray, but he could just make out the hill's peak. And standing there, silhouetted against the gloom, was a figure, a tall, vague, white shape, standing perfectly still, and it was staring directly at him, at the dormitory. As I watched it frozen in horror, the eerie lullaby started again. This time, it wasn't a faint, distant melody. It was loud, echoing through the night, as if the singer was standing right outside his door. A chilling, final invitation. In that moment, Liam understood the most terrifying truth of all. The thing on the hill, the whispering voice, the owner of that handkerchief. It hadn't stayed on the hill. It had followed him. Thanks for sticking with me through that chilling tale. Sometimes the quietest places hold the darkest secrets. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the unknown. Stay safe out there, and maybe don't walk alone at night. Sarah was one of us, a young professional trying to make her way in the big city. Late nights at the office were the norm, part of the grind, and like many of us, she was always looking for a way to save a little time, a little money. Her particular shortcut was a walk home through the city's old industrial district, a place most people avoided after sundown. It was quicker, sure, but it led her through a place the locals called Alley 9. Now, Alley 9 wasn't just any back alley. It was a long, narrow passage that seemed to swallow all light and sound. The buildings on either side were tall, skeletal remains of forgotten factories, their windows like vacant eyes. No streetlights dared to pierce its gloom. It was a scar on the city map, a place you instinctively knew to avoid. But Sarah, driven by exhaustion and the desire to just get home, would often brave it. It was just a dark alley, right? What was the worst that could happen? One night, or rather, one early morning, around 2:30 a.m., Sarah found herself at the mouth of Alley 9 once again. The air in the main street was cool, but as she stepped into the alley, a sudden, intense cold wrapped around her. It was a heavy, damp chill that felt unnatural, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. She pulled out her phone, the screen casting a small, brave circle of light onto the cracked pavement. That's when the first strange thing happened. Her phone, which had been at a full 98% charge just moments before, flickered and died. The screen went black, no warning, no low battery signal. Just gone. Suddenly, she was plunged into an almost absolute darkness. The faint glow from the distant main street did little to help. Panic began to prickle at the back of her neck. It's just the cold, she told herself, her voice a small, trembling whisper in the oppressive silence. Phones do weird things in the cold, but she didn't believe it. Not really. With a deep breath, she started to feel her way forward, one hand trailing along the damp, moss-covered brick wall. The texture was slimy, and she tried not to think about what she was touching. Every little sound was amplified. The scuttling of unseen things, the drip of water from a rusty pipe, the sound of her own frantic heartbeat in her ears. She was about halfway through, her eyes struggling to adjust, when she saw it. A shape. Up ahead, standing perfectly still, next to a large, overflowing dumpster, was a tall, dark figure. Her first thought was relief. Another person. Maybe they were just waiting for someone. But as her eyes strained to make out details, the relief curdled into pure ice-cold terror. It looked like a man in a long, dark coat, but where his head should have been ... There was nothing, not just darkness, but a void. A patch of absolute black that seemed to absorb the faint light around it. A featureless, empty space. Despite its lack of eyes, Sarah felt a crushing, malevolent attention fixed upon her. It was a feeling that went beyond sight, a psychic pressure that screamed danger. Her feet were rooted to the spot, her lungs frozen. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to obey. She was completely, utterly paralyzed by fear. Then, it began to move. It wasn't a normal walk. The figure's steps were unnaturally slow, deliberate, and with each step came a sound that would haunt Sarah's nightmares forever. A heavy, grating drag scrape against the concrete. Drag ... scrape ... scrape. It was rhythmic, patient, and it was getting closer. The sound echoed off the high walls of the alley, making it impossible to tell exactly how far away it was. But she knew it was coming for her. Her mind was a whirlwind of silent pleas, begging for an escape, for a miracle, for anything to break the spell of this waking nightmare. Just as the scraping sound seemed to be right on top of her, a blinding light sliced through the darkness. A delivery truck had turned onto the main street at the far end of the alley, its powerful headlights sweeping the length of the passage for a brief, brilliant moment. In that flash of illumination, Sarah saw the figure clearly, and the sight was even more horrifying than she could have imagined. It wasn't a man in a coat. It was a towering, shadowy silhouette whose proportions were all wrong, with long, thin limbs that didn't look human. It seemed to hover just slightly off the ground, and the void where its head should be was a swirling, churning vortex of impenetrable darkness. That flash of light broke the paralysis. A final, desperate surge of adrenaline flooded her system. She didn't think. She just ran. She scrambled back the way she came, her hands scraping against the rough brick, not caring about the pain. Her only thought to escape the suffocating darkness and that horrifying scraping sound. She burst out of the alley's entrance and back onto the well-lit street, collapsing against a lamppost, gasping for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. The normal city sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the buzz of the streetlights, had never sounded so beautiful. After a few moments, her heart still hammering against her ribs, she forced herself to look back. She had to know. She peered into the dark maw of Alley 9. The figure, the Faceless Walker, was gone. The alley was empty and silent once more, but on the grimy concrete, right next to the dumpster where the creature had been standing, was a fresh stain. A deep, thick, tar-like sludge that glistened whitely under the distant light, marking the exact spot where the nightmare had stood. Sarah never took that shortcut again. She learned a hard lesson that night. Some paths are left dark for a reason, and some shortcuts, they just aren't worth the price. Thank you so much for watching. If you have your own chilling stories about shortcuts gone wrong, share them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there, and maybe take the long way home. Have you ever stumbled out of a bar, a little too happy from the night's celebrations, and thought, I just need to get home? That's exactly where Marcus found himself, standing on a deserted curb in a new city, the world spinning just a little. It was past 1 in the morning. The streets were empty, and all he wanted was his bed. Just as a wave of late-night loneliness hit him, a car pulled up. It was a taxi, an old, faded green model that seemed to materialize from the shadows. It wasn't an Uber. It wasn't a Lyft. But at that hour, Marcus wasn't about to be picky. He gratefully slid into the backseat. The driver was an older man, thin and gaunt, with a silence that filled the entire car. "The Grandview Hotel, please," Marcus said, his voice a little thick. The driver just nodded, and they pulled away from the curb. The drive was eerily quiet. No radio, no small talk, just the soft hum of the engine. Marcus looked out the window, but the familiar, vibrant city lights seemed different tonight. They were muted, cast in a sickly, jaundiced yellow glow, as if the whole city was unwell. The familiar landmarks he'd passed earlier that day now looked like skeletal remains of buildings, looming and sinister in the dim light. A strange feeling of unease began to creep up his spine. a cold sensation that had nothing to do with the night air. He tried to shake it off, blaming it on the drinks, but the silence in the cab was deafening. Pressing in on him, he glanced to the rearview mirror, and his heart jumped. The driver's eyes were locked onto his Te were dar holopits in his pale face. Then the man spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sounded like stones grinding together. "You're walking alone at night, son?" he asked. I shouldn't have stopped for just one. A chill shot through Marcus. He forced a nervous laugh. "What do you mean, sir? Am I supposed to bring a friend?" The driver didn't answer. He turned his gaze back to the road, but the corner of his mouth was pulled up into a rigid, unsettling grin. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was something predatory. The unease in Marcus's stomach churned into full-blown panic. Every instinct was screaming at him that something was terribly wrong. He looked out the window, trying to get his bearings, but the streets were unfamiliar, twisted into a labyrinth he didn't recognize. They weren't heading toward his hotel. They were driving deeper into a part of the city that looked ancient and forgotten. The buildings grew sparse, replaced by gnarled skeletal trees that clawed at the night sky. Then he saw it, an old, overgrown cemetery. Its iron gates rusted and hanging off their hinges, tombstones leaning like crooked teeth. Just as they passed the entrance, the driver slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop threw Marcus forward, and the engine cut out, plunging them into a terrifying silence. The driver slowly turned his entire body around in his seat to face Marcus. The grin he'd seen earlier was now stretched into a grotesque, contorted grimace that split his face in two. His eyes, fixed on Marcus, held a terrifying emptiness. "This is a good spot," the driver rasped, his voice barely a whisper, "to end your journey of walking alone at night." Pure terror seized Marcus. He lunged for the door handle, pulling at it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. He was trapped. The metallic click of the locks echoed in the small space. Desperate, he pulled out his wallet. "Look, take it all," he pleaded, shoving a handful of cash toward the driver. "Just let me go." The driver simply shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. That horrifying grin never wavered. "I don't need money." As the driver's hand came up, as if to wave away the offer, Marcus noticed something on his wrists. They weren't marks or tattoos. They were a deep dark, purple rope burns, chafed raw into his skin, stark against his deathly pale flesh. A wave of nausea washed over Marcus. Who was this man? What had happened to him? He dared to look up, back at the rearview mirror, hoping to see the driver's face reflected there, to make some sense of this nightmare. But what he saw shattered his last bit of composure. Reflected in the glass wasn't a face at all. It was a blur, a pale, featureless distortion of a human head, like a smudged photograph of a ghost. It was nothing, and it was everything horrible all at once. A primal scream tore from Marcus's throat. He started kicking the back of the driver's seat, over and over, fueled by sheer, animalistic terror. "Let me out. Let me out," he yelled, his voice cracking. Just then, a brilliant flash of light filled the taxi. Headlights. Another car was passing. In that blinding moment of illumination, the thing let out a scream of its own. It was a high-pitched, inhuman shriek that vibrated through the very frame of the car. And with that unearthly sound, there was a loud asterisk. Click asterisk. The door locks had released. Without a second's hesitation, Marcus threw his shoulder against the door, tumbling out onto the cold, rough asphalt. He scrambled to his feet, his knees and hands scraped raw, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He spun around expecting a confrontation, expecting the car to still be there. But there was nothing. The street was completely empty. The faded green taxi had vanished. It hadn't driven away. It had simply ceased to exist, leaving only the scent of old dust and decay hanging in the night air. Marcus stood there, trembling, alone on the side of a dark road next to a cemetery. The silence of the night, now a welcome relief. From that day on, Marcus swore he'd never walk alone at night again, and he certainly never hailed a cab that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Because sometimes, The ride you're desperate for is the one that has been waiting to take you somewhere you can never come back from. Thanks for joining me on this terrifying ride. What would you have done in Marcus's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories that will keep you up at night, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more chills. Stay safe out there.